Sprankling and Coletta book. And from what I can see now, again, I'm still learning the system, although I spent at least 7 hours training on this. Let's see. Audience view, screen sharing, plus yes. Oh, great. So you can see what I can see. If I were a first-year student or a second-year student and I didn't understand my goals in terms of how to do well in law school, I might actually pick up, or I would ordinarily pick up the assignment sheet for the semester, and I would then begin reading by assignment. I'm going to suggest another strategy that will probably work far better than simply reading by assignment. The first thing I'm going to suggest to you is that you recognize that you're studying a value system. That value system I categorize as that of the traditional lawyer. Traditionally, in terms of the history of lawyers in this country, is that traditionally lawyers have been from a certain background. And the characteristics are such that the background has been Eurocentric, it's been upper class, it's been conservative, and it's been male. If you want to do well in law school, you have to recognize that you're studying a value system. The value system of the casebook editor, as well as the value system of the professor, represent the traditional lawyer. You have to recognize that there's a third set of values that you have to be concerned about, which are your own. If you don't come from the background of the traditional lawyer, you may experience a value conflict, but while you're studying the law, you need to understand the value system, and you need to also apply that value system in terms of taking your exams and learning how to actually practice law. With respect to learning a course, my suggestion is before you read any assignment, go to the table of contents for that particular casebook, such as the Sprankling casebook. And when we look at the first page of the Sprankling table of contents, what we see is that there's a preface, there's features of this casebook, there are acknowledgments, and then there's the table of cases. I'm going to suggest that in every situation that you make a point of reading the preface and perhaps the introduction to your casebook, that you also read the editor's notes with respect to the features of the casebook, and you also read the acknowledgments. Oftentimes in the acknowledgments you can find out who mentored your professor. So you can find out about your professor's way of thinking by actually checking the professor's mentor or mentors. I know that when I was in law school, many times if we didn't have a professor who had sample exams on file, my colleagues or peers would actually research the I'll call it the mentor of the particular professor, and actually read all of the professors, the mentors, old exams and perhaps articles to get an insight into how the professor thought. So it's really important to understand the casebook editor's thinking in terms of the organization of the materials, and oftentimes the editors will actually tell you what their intentions were with respect to organizing the casebook. If you look at this particular table of contents, it actually goes on for 10 pages. And note there's Chapter 1, the concept of property, Chapter 2, let's see, what's that, owning real property, Chapter 3, an introduction to intellectual property. Let me see what Chapter 3 is. No. Chapter 3 is owning personal property. Chapter 4 is an introduction to intellectual property. Chapter 5 is estates and future interests. Chapter 6 is concurrent ownership and marital property. Chapter 7 is leasing real property. Chapter 8 is selling real property. Chapter 9 is private land use planning. Chapter 10 is land use regulation. Chapter 11 is an introduction to environmental law. Chapter 12 is eminent domain. Chapter 13 is takings. Just looking at this table of contents, you might feel really overwhelmed just by the sheer length of the table of contents. But I want to teach you a strategy that will be very helpful for you with respect to excelling and understanding each and every one of your courses from day one. And I want to teach you the strategy of developing a short outline because, first of all, it teaches you the operative value system, or you learn the operative value system in that process, and also you can then impose the structure from the table of contents on your course materials and not be overwhelmed. One of the secrets to doing well in law school is to actually understand from day one the structure of the course. So what I'd like to do is go over how to develop a table of contents. I'm going to switch out of this screen view. Let's see. And what I'd like for all of us to do is click on the document or the handout that says, let's see, handout 2. I'm still screen sharing. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment. And I've stopped screen sharing. All right. And now what I'd like for us to do is click on the handouts and a second handout that's in the folder is called 9.4.15 and 9.5.15 Real Property Webinar Short Outline. I would like to teach you that which I consider one of the most powerful keys to doing well in law school, and that is really the development of a short outline with respect to each and every one of your courses. In terms of the development of the short outline, given the fact that this particular casebook has 13 chapters, what I suggest again is that you read the preface, the introduction, the acknowledgments, etc. before you read any assignments, and then you look at the professor's syllabus for the semester, and assuming the professor is going to cover all 13 chapters and actually cover them in the same order, what I would have you do is I would have you begin the development of your short outline so that you can actually manage the course rather than the course managing you. In other words, I'm going to suggest a strategy for developing a short outline that will have you be proactive rather than reactive. With respect to developing the short outline, the first page of the short outline should really be developed, let's say, by hand. And I know in terms of these days that most students are really using their computers to take notes, using their computers to write their long outlines, using their computers rather than going back to the old tradition of handwriting. I would suggest that you actually handwrite your short outline, and that a part of your process will be to set up your first page of your short outline. And if you look at the handout in terms of page 1, what we see is Real Property Short Outline. I've given it a title, Sprankling and Coletta's book, 3rd edition. And then what we see is on that very first page of the short outline, we see all 13 chapter titles. My suggestion is that you go ahead and you write down the first 6 or 7 chapter titles on this first page of that which is going to become your short outline, and you memorize them. So you handwrite the chapter titles, beginning with chapter 1, the concept of property, 2, owning real property, 3, owning personal property, 4, an introduction to intellectual property, 5, estates and future interests, and 6, concurrent ownership and marital property. So write down, let's say, the first 6 chapter titles and memorize them. Once you're clear that you have memorized them, and you can do that by repeating the chapter titles again to yourself, then you go ahead and you continue the process and you write down the remaining 7 chapter titles: leasing real property, selling real property, private land use planning, land use regulation, introduction to environmental law, eminent domain, takings. Then write down the remaining 7 chapter titles and memorize them. Once you have the last 7 chapter titles memorized, then go back and see if you can repeat all 13 chapter titles to yourself from memory. If not, go back and do this exercise again, beginning with writing down the first 6 chapter titles, memorize them, write down the remaining chapter titles, make sure they're memorized, and then repeat them to yourself. At the point in time when you have memorized all of the chapter titles that are going to be covered that semester, you will have memorized the major issues for the course. So in an exam, when you are tested, you'll be able to say to yourself, all right, given this particular fact pattern, has chapter 1 been triggered, yes or no? If the answer is no, you can go on in terms of your thinking process. Has chapter 2 been triggered, yes or no? If the answer is no, you go on. Has chapter 3 been triggered, yes or no? And you go through this process of identifying the major chapters that have been triggered so that you can then identify the major areas of law that have been triggered to which you are supposed to respond. If you use this process, which is really called linear thinking, it's the linear process, what you can do is eliminate all the chapters from your thinking that are not triggered by that fact pattern, and then you can isolate the key issues or key chapters that have been triggered, and then you'll be able to develop your outline of your answer for your questions before you even begin. With respect to the development of the short outline, however, going back, make sure that you write out and memorize the chapter titles that are going to be covered that semester. Just so you know, the human brain can normally only memorize 6 or 7 items in a series. So in terms of my suggestion was that you actually write down the first 6 or 7 chapter titles, memorize them, go ahead, repeat them to yourself. Once you know that those are memorized, then write down the remaining chapter titles and memorize those. And then once you're clear that you've memorized the remaining chapter titles, repeat the entire, I'll say, set of chapter titles to yourself. And if you've got them memorized, now you can go on. With respect to the development of the short outline, again, before you begin reading even your first assignment, what I would do is come to my second, I would come to that which I'll label, if you'll turn to the second page or look at the second page of the short outline, what I would do is on the second page of the short outline, before I read the information in Chapter 1, I would write down the chapter title, Chapter 1, the concept of property, and then I would write down the major subheadings: why recognize property, what is property, and I would memorize those subheadings. At that point in time, you know the major issues that are going to be covered in that particular chapter, and you can use this as a guide for your thinking, for your organizing, for your responding even on the exams. With respect to this process then, when it comes to reading, I'm going to suggest that you remember to read by subheading. In other words, the casebook editors have really edited the cases and the materials so that the major issues within the cases and materials that appear under, for instance, why recognize property, have a direct relationship to the subheading as well as the chapter title. So at all times then you can think in terms of, all right, what category am I in? I'm in the category meaning chapter title of concept of property, and I am in the subheading of why recognize property. And therefore, when it comes to thinking about the cases and what the major issues are, the major issues with respect to those cases will have something to do with why recognized property. When it comes to reading the cases and materials under subheading B, I can guarantee you that the casebook editor's intention was that those materials actually relate directly to the subheading, what is property, and to the chapter title, concept of property. So learn to read by subheading and also learn to take into consideration the chapter structure as well as the subheading. So before you read the information in Chapter 1, then again, write down the chapter title on page 2 of your short outline. Write down the subheadings for that chapter and memorize them. Once you've memorized those the subheadings rather, then you're ready to read the information in that particular chapter. When it comes to the development of the short outline, my suggestion is that you develop your short outline as a part of your reading process. If you wait until the end of the course to develop your short outline, you will feel overwhelmed. You'll feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the material that you've been exposed to, and it may be too overwhelming for you to learn your short outline at the end of the course. So my suggestion is that one of the key strategies is to develop your short outline during your reading process. Going back to the third page, or coming to the third page of that which I'm labeling as the short outline, we see that on page 2, the author has come back to the second page of the short outline, and before the author reads Chapter 2, the author writes down, or the information and assignments from Chapter 2, excuse me, I'm going to cough, before the student writes down, or rather reads, the information that's been assigned under Chapter 2, what one would do is come back to page 2 of your short outline, write down the chapter title for Chapter 2, Owning Real Property, and then write down the major subheadings: A, Adverse Possession; B, the vertical dimension of ownership; and 3, Water Law. Memorize those subheadings, and at that point you now know the major issues that are going to be raised with respect to owning real property and that particular chapter. So then, in terms of your process, when it comes to reading the assignments under A, Adverse Possession, you can keep in mind the facts that all of the materials, including the cases and the articles that might appear under adverse possession, have a direct relationship to the title adverse possession. In other words, the cases have been edited in such a way that the cases focus upon the issue of adverse possession. The articles are also going to be focused on adverse possession. So you read the information under adverse possession being very clear about what the editor's purposes are. Then when it comes to B, the vertical dimension of ownership, you do the same. So you're reading by category, and you're able to distill the information because you understand the editor's chief purposes. The same will be true with respect to water law. So it's important to develop your short outline basically chapter by chapter, memorizing the subheadings for each of the chapters so that you're not overwhelmed and so that you actually know where you are at all points in time. Going on to the next page of the short outline, we will see that at this point the short outline has been continued, so we see the breakdown not only of chapters 1 and 2, we see the breakdown for chapter 3, owning personal property, with the subheadings. And again, before reading the information in chapter 3, the author or the student would have come back to page 2 of the short outline, written down chapter 3, the major subheadings, and memorized them. Also, the author would do the same, or the student would do the same with respect to Chapter 4, Introduction to Intellectual Property, with the 4 subheadings, and the author would, or the student rather, would memorize those subheadings. And then the student continues this process. So we see on the next page that we see on the next page that the author continues. So we've got Chapter 5, Estates and Future Interests, and then A, Short History, Modern Freehold Estates, C, Modern Future Interests, and Rules Furthering Marketability. My suggestion is that one of the most powerful keys for excelling in law school is to understand, first of all, that it is important to understand not only that you're studying a value system, but it's important to impose structure upon that value system by developing a short outline, which allows you to understand the skeleton of the course so that you can then actually fill in the information. You can actually fill in the information rather than responding simply to your assignments. The short outline, I think, is a critical key to doing well because you can use that same short outline for, one, developing your long outline. And I think it's really important to develop a long outline for each and every one of your courses, because if you learn how to outline properly, you will also actually set up the sentences in your long outlines that you're going to use for writing your exams. You're going to set up the long outlines so that you can actually use the wording from your long outlines to actually, let's say, well, you can use it really for both your essays as well as your multiple choice questions. With respect to, let's see, again, oh dear, let me go back in. Let me see. We're still in session, I'm sure. Let me see, I got knocked out. I'm logging back in. Somehow I was knocked out. With respect to this short outline and the development of the short outline, it's critical. My suggestion is that with respect to studying a subject, let's say that you're studying real property, my suggestion is, first of all, learn to work in 3 or 4 hour blocks of time. Not only that, it's really important to take breaks. What I have observed is that students who work more than 4 hours simply are working against themselves. Not only is it important to take breaks, my suggestion is that you take a break every hour while you're studying. You take a 10 or 15-minute break, because your mind will necessarily take a break whether you do or you don't take a break. So work on a 45 to 50-minute hour. And my suggestion with respect to your short outline is that you actually repeat your short outline in terms of where you are at that point. You repeat your short outline at the beginning of every study hour after your break so that you can reinforce your memory with respect to your short outline. You should know your short outline as well as perhaps you know your own name when it comes into the exam. And by doing so, you will not feel overwhelmed with respect to your exams. So understand that you are studying a value system, that of the traditional lawyer. In terms of how we learn our values, we ordinarily learn our values over the dinner table, in our communities, in our churches, in our associations, in our whatever, through our friends. This time, I'm going to suggest that you're going to use a more organized approach, and the more organized approach is really to develop a short outline so that you are in control and understanding the subject from day one. With respect to doing well in law school, the first thing that I want to say, and doing well on the bar, doing well is a lot of work. It's simply a lot of work, but it is doable. If you were admitted into law school, then you are capable of excelling. My observation is that C's are the most expensive grades in law school because C's often translate into poor bar performance. That also translates into I'll say lack of job opportunities. I want to ensure you or assure you that you can excel and that your goal is to achieve your own personal best, and that by being organized and by approaching the material from the vantage point, let's say, of the traditional lawyer, you can learn to excel. It takes a lot of work to excel. I'm going to say that with respect to being a full-time student. It probably, my suggestion is that you set up, first of all, you intend to work 6 days a week, and you take one full day off, but my suggestion is that including class time, you're probably going to be putting in 10 to 12 hours per day. But you can put in that same amount of time getting a C, or you can put in the same amount of time and get an A. One of the issues with respect to doing well, and I want to announce the standard now, when it comes to doing well on an exam, first of all, you have to be able to recognize both the major and minor issues, and if you use your short outline as a sifting and sorting process, you will be able to identify all of the major as well as minor issues. But also, I want to announce to you, although it's not usually articulated very well from what I've experienced, is that you are always going to be writing for an uninformed reader. And you have an absolute duty to educate your uninformed reader. And you have to do so very quickly because you're writing for a busy reader who's always reading under pressure, meaning your ultimate reader is usually a trial court judge who's reading under pressure. But your reader could be a client, your reader could be another lawyer at your firm, and you need to be able to educate your reader. Therefore, when it comes to setting up your long outlines, which will be basically be generated by filling in your short outlines, you actually want to articulate the principles of law in complete sentences in your long outlines so that you can use them on your essays. What did I want to also say? Oh, another key to excelling in law school is to develop a calendar that's going to work for you. Again, if you are a full-time student, I would plan upon studying 6 days a week and taking a 7th day off. But what I would do at this point is also set up your template in terms of your template for your study for each week. And what you'll want to do then is actually schedule your time in a way that's going to work for you, including setting up breaks. It's important not to work more than 4 hours, and it's important, if you can, to take at least a 2-hour break. Your mind needs to relax from I'll say, from your heavy studies. Also, eventually, or really within the first 2 weeks of law school, I'm going to suggest that you set up a master schedule. With respect to giving you some insights into the amount of time it's going to take you to prepare, generally it takes an hour per 10 pages to read through the casebook materials. Generally, it'll take you an hour and a half per 10 pages to outline your materials, meaning set up your long outlines. And then my suggestion is that you actually do practice exams on a regular basis. And my suggestion is that after you've outlined a chapter or two, you begin taking practice exams, and that you might want to schedule as many as 8 to 10 hours of practice exams per course throughout the semester. It's a lot of work, but it is doable and you can excel. But it takes practice, and truly practice makes perfect. With respect to my courses, I have developed a course which used to be called Study Methods, which produce excellence, and over time we've changed the time to the basic exam course. The basic exam course is an 8-hour online course that was filmed at the Minnesota Continuing Legal Education Studio, and the students who attended that session were invited to the course by the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers. Turns out the members of the executive committee had been my students when they were in law school at the Minnesota schools, and they wanted to bring me back in to teach my course. With respect to the basic exam course, there are 3 classes included in that course, including a 3-hour class on how to excel in law school. In that class, I break down not only the value system, but also how to calendar your time in such a way that you can set up a master schedule for the entire semester, so that you can develop a steady work rhythm. You will not be able to cram for these courses at the last minute and excel, unless you are a miracle person, or and maybe you are a miraculous worker. In the second class of the basic exam course, there's a 2-hour class on outlining. And in the first hour, I teach my theories about how to outline courses properly. And in the second hour of that class, I go over specific examples of outlines that are ineffective, that have been generated by students, and outlines that are effective, so that I can show you how to outline properly so that you can really use the outlines as your foundation for your exams. While I was teaching my courses for the University of Minnesota, the dean, who was in charge of the program, actually found that there's 100% correlation between the quality of the students' long outlines and their exam grades. And the reason for that is that with your long outlines, if they are properly prepared, you're actually setting up the sentences that you're going to use on your essays, and the sentences that you can use for figuring out what the correct answer is for your multiple choice questions. In the third hour of my class, or rather in the third class, which is a 3-hour class on exam writing, legal analysis, and the exam templates, I let you know, first of all, that there is a template for writing, which is really interesting because I'm not so sure that most people explain exam writing in that way. But in the first hour of that class, I go over my theories for how to write an exam, including how to organize your exam based upon 3 different patterns. And I also then, in the second hour, look at specific examples of both student work, and I also look at examples of, I'll say, sample exams that we prepared to show you how to write exams well. And then in the third hour of that class, I go over the exam templates, and I show you how the template works. And once you understand the template, you can apply that same strategy for answering any question. What I want for you to know is that practice does result in success, but it's also critical to begin your studies early. It's critical not to be overwhelmed by the materials. It is so important to develop your short outlines as a part of your reading process so that you really understand the course from day one. You can understand these courses from day one. My observation is that there is a communication gap between law professors and students. And I am actually about to address this gap by going to the National Conference of Bar Examiners, because there has been a tremendous fall off with respect to bar performance. And I am very clear that if students were taught the strategies for success while in law school, then they could do well on the bar exam. It's equally as important to understand the process for learning and applying the law as it is for learning the substantive law. So this is my purpose in terms of meeting with you today. And let me see if I can get back to my webinar. Let's see. And we're in session. And good. Let's see. Again, this is the second time I've done this. This is actually going well. What I want to do is, let's see, so we're in session. I need to pull up that window. I don't know why I don't see the window. What I wanted to do was take some questions from you. Give me a moment and let me see why I don't see the window. So I see that we're in session. Great. Let me see. I don't see the regular window. Oh, I see why. Okay. Let me go back. I want to take questions from you. And yes, we are in session. Oh, I see what I'm doing. Okay, great. I need to expand my own window. And what I'd like to do is take questions. If any of you have questions, let me see. If you have any questions, why don't you type them in, and I'll repeat your questions and then respond. One question that came up yesterday was, what would you teach me about, or can you teach me how to write an exam? To which I responded, yes, I can teach you how to write an exam. However, it will take you about 3 hours to listen to me in terms of writing an exam. My suggestion is that each of you sign up for the basic exam course, and you will be given a discount. There's an early bird discount for each of you. If you sign up for the exam course, basic exam course by the 15th, you get $50 off of the fee. If you sign up for the advanced course as well, you get $125 off of both courses. And then, of course, you can always sign up for a block of 5 hours of faculty instruction, in which case the advanced course is thrown in for free. With respect to the advanced exam writing course, that course meets over the semester for a minimum of 3 sessions for 2 hours per session. For the last few years, as soon as 2 students sign up for the advanced course, I begin scheduling the sessions, and we've had as many as 6 or 7 classes over the semester. The advanced exam course schedule is set up based upon the student schedules, and generally we've been meeting on Friday afternoons from 5 until 7 Eastern time, but again it depends upon the students who've enrolled. In the advanced exam writing course, you're going to get perhaps more feedback than you will receive anywhere else. Each student is allowed to turn in at least 10 papers, including 2 long outlines. There is a page limit on the long outlines, but you can turn in 10 papers, two long outlines and 8 essays, or you can turn in 8 essays, or 10 essays if you want. What happens with respect to the advanced class is that 48 hours before the advanced class, students submit their essays or their outlines, and then we put together a packet of materials, and the materials are sent out 24 hours before class, and then we critique both the outlines and the essays line by line using the theories that I've laid out in the basic exam course. My students who've taken those courses have responded by telling me they've done extraordinarily well. In fact, I must say recently, one of my students from more than 20 years ago contacted me to let me know that she is now an appellate court judge, and after her first year she had some struggles and ended up taking my course and working with me, and wow, now she's an appellate court judge. If you see the if you saw the photo which you were exposed to in the waiting room, that's a photo of, of my student and his family and me with the appellate court justice for the New York courts. And this photo was taken after my student was sworn in. He had actually graduated, meaning sworn in last September. He had actually graduated from law school in 1996, if you can imagine, and he'd begun that process of cycling and recycling with respect to taking the bar. And finally, he found me through basically his law school dean, and I worked with him. And it was such a celebration for all of us, his family, as well as for me, with respect to his passing the bar. So this can be done, but it's a lot of work. And if you're committed to doing the work, then great. If you're not committed to doing the work, then it might be a struggle. But hopefully the information that I've shared today about how to develop a short outline will be very helpful. The other question that came up yesterday was what are the discounts? And I think I've gone over that with respect to the discounts. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, with that, I would suggest that we go back to the handouts. Let's see. And I would like for you to click on the happy group photo. And I would like to welcome you into law school. I would like for you to have a, let's say, less stressful experience. I would like to see smiles on your faces rather than tears. And so with that, I'm going to end this webinar, and I thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful day. And you can communicate with me. My direct email address is prof.skillman@the-Skillman Method. Have a wonderful day and happy Labor Day weekend. Congratulations to each of you. Bye-bye.